Hello and welcome to a discussion on the topic Reinventing Durkheim's Religion. Let me first give a brief introduction about the man himself, David Emil Durkheim. Durkheim, as many of you might be aware of, was a French sociologist, social psychologist and philosopher who was born on 15th April 1858. Right from the beginning of his career, Durkheim was interested in a scientific approach to the study of society. Perhaps that is why he did not find humanistic studies interesting and therefore turned his attention from psychology and philosophy to ethics and eventually to sociology. After having taught philosophy in several provincial schools, Durkheim left for Germany in 1885, where for 2 years he studied sociology. But the next year, as part of his doctoral thesis, he had completed the draft of the Division of Labour in Society, which was published in the year 1892. His work on religion and also his last major work entitled The Elementary Forms of the Religious Life was published in 1912. Shortly after, in 1917, Durkheim died of a stroke in Paris at the age of 59. Durkheim's ideas, rather his work on religion, has invited and still do invite differing views from different thinkers. There were many scholars and anthropologists who challenged and questioned the ideas posited by Durkheim on the subject of religion. For example, if one reads Joachim Wach's classic entitled Sociology of Religion, one may find that Durkheim, in his pursuit of explaining the phenomenon of religion, had hardly focused on the origins of religion, which is the most significant and mention-worthy part. Therefore, if you are a student of comparative religion, perhaps a study of Durkheim's work might fail to provide you with the answers to the questions regarding the nature and the origins of religion. At the same time, there were many neo-Durkheimians as well whose influence was deeply felt during the late 1960s. Some of them are Mary Douglas, Victor Turner, Peter Badger, Louis Dumont, Clifford Geertz, Robert Bellah and Levi-Strauss. The neo-Durkheimians made it possible for students to read Durkheim from a newer perspective. They not only provided theory where it was missing in religious studies, but also provided such conceptualization which could not be dismissed as anti-religious. Slowly, Durkheim's The Elementary Forms of the Religious Life came to be accepted as something of a gold mine of theoretical capital and also secured a place in the classroom courses. You see, the idea of sacred in Durkheim's work was highly criticized, primarily because of its inappropriateness in academic field and also because it was treated as theological and metaphysical. But it must also be remembered that the concept of sacred in this man's work was a social representation. Durkheim has regarded the concept of sacred as a taboo, let's say as a prohibited object, sometimes even as a kind of force, or you may even say a kind of mana. This concept of sacred is rooted in various aspects, and these aspects are interrelated to one another. For example, we can see that the sacred, being a symbol of group identity, holds primacy, wherefrom it can be deduced that it contains a certain force, a force which ought to be controlled in an appropriate manner. Not only the idea of sacred alone, but Durkheim's concepts of sacred and profane as two distinguished realms have been strongly criticized as well by many thinkers, many of whom suggest that Durkheim should have been clearer in elucidating on the relationship between sacred and profane, not as class of things, but as relationships to things. You see, Durkheim's orientation to the binary of sacred and profane is more of a social duality rather than a metaphysical one. Durkheim maintained that there should be a boundary between things that have more powerful status and those that do not. Also, things less powerful in status should be involved in those processes that would help them in gaining access to the former, like taking off shoes before entering a holy place, or bowing before a king, or some other authoritative figure. So, as Durkheim has put in his own words, the sacred thing is par excellence that which the profane must not and cannot touch with impurity. He adds that man cannot approach his God intimately while still bearing the marks of his profane life. Pickering, in his study of Durkheim's work, writes that Durkheim's idea of the sacred is useful beyond its encashment in the sacred or profane binary, about which he wrote early in his elementary forms. This would be an alternate way of studying the history of religion if sacred objects are assumed to be constituted by social prestige. You see, sacredness represents the shared identity of a certain group, but it is not any characteristic of a given object. What Durkheim said is that things are classified as sacred and profane by reference to the totem. In fact, this totem is the very archetype or the perfect example of sacred things. In addition, he has also spoken of clan. He said that clan is a group where members are united, where members share the same name, the same emblems of identity, as well as same ritual relations with the same sacred objects. If the name and symbol that give them a tangible form is taken away, the clan loses its importance and can no longer be even imagined. But this does not imply that a clan is consanguineous or territorially based. When one clan is differentiated from another, the fundamentals of totemic identity gain importance. Have you heard of markers? Things that differentiate one clan from another? Well, let me elaborate on it by drawing a reference to the work of Jonathan Zittel Smith, a historian of religions. Smith has spoken about the churinga, which is a stone or wooden object of religious significance and is considered to be sacred among the Australian Aboriginals Oruntas. Markers may come in other different forms also, ranging from female circumcision in some African communities to headscarves for Muslim women. It can also be the differences between Sunnis and Shiites Muslims regarding the manner in which they pray. Now, if I ask the question, what is sacredness? How do you think it can be aptly answered? Well, let me budge in a bit. Sacredness is what keeps the world of representations in place. That is to say, it is something that keeps the world representations in a particular system. Here, representations imply those of the group being and those of the world as well. Now, what is profane? The profane, on the other hand, refers to what disrupts this system, which is oppositional to sacred things. So, you see, there is a binary of order. This binary of order was developed in a number of ways. According to Mary Douglas, a renowned British anthropologist, where there is dirt, there is system. That is to say, wherever there is an order, there is also a strong likelihood for impurity, and order creates boundaries between and within groups. Like strong groups demand most highly defined purity rules for the sustenance of membership, something which the less strong or lesser powerful groups usually don't. There are many other neo-Durkheimians who have also shared their ideas in this regard. For example, Dumont linked the ideas of purity with that of social hierarchy in his treatise on the Indian caste system. Homo erectus and Jonathan Smith distinguished between sacrality and non-worldly or spatial things in his work. Another notable aspect of Durkheim's idea of the sacred is the effervescence of group gatherings as opposed to the daily routine life. Although Durkheim tried to blend this in his sacred or profane binary, he could not do so because it bifurcated in another direction. Also, while Durkheim noted that the sacred develops from feelings rooted in collective events, there were many other thinkers who have shown that it is during these events or festivals that taboos are broken, and hence the boundary and structure of the sacred gets affected, rather disturbed. Let me briefly discuss about Calilois and Georges Bethé, who were the representatives of the so-called left-wing Durkheimian school and its college de Sociology. First, let me speak of Calilois. Calilois, in his synthesis, Man and the Sacred, wrote that a singular idea of the sacred is an uncertain one because it is a both restricting force of order as well a liberating force that breaks through all rigidities. He said that war rules over the function of festival excitement in modern societies, and in this context proposed that the festival is to the time of labor what war is to peace. They are both phases of movement and excess as against the phases of stability and moderation. On the other hand, Bethé spoke of the uninhibited and violent nature of the sacred and its relation to such aspects as erotic effusion, ecstatic mysticism, festival reversals, etc. Let me now discuss about such concepts like festivals, ceremonies and other ritual gatherings. It cannot be denied that these concepts do have an integrative role to play, and hence they form the infrastructure of most religious systems. Let me cite an example for a clearer understanding. You must be aware of the observance of Ramadan among the Muslim community, where one can find strong collective involvement and commitment. Suffice it to say that one can also find the effervescence factor in connection to the emotional ecstasy and their illustrations among such anti-formal groups. In this way, the totemic sacred is against the forces of its atrophy. While discussing about Durkheim's religion, I think that it is of utmost importance to briefly talk about the ideas of Mircea Eliade, a Romanian historian of religion, and perhaps the major classical figure in comparative religion. Eliade was widely influenced by his readings of Callias, about whom I had already discussed, and also of his reading of the sacred and the profane. According to Eliade, the sacred and the profane represent a simpler duality than what Durkheim professes. And also, while Durkheim emphasized more on the particularity of the two realms, Eliade focused more on the association and integration between them. Differing views of Durkheim and Eliade do not in any way imply that they shared nothing common in their perspective of religious ideas. Both of them believed that the study of religious worlds was significant for people, especially for people in contemporary times in their search for moral and spiritual values. Hence, there is a strong recommendation of Durkheimian reading of Eliade and vice versa, as that would be both enlightening and beneficial to our understanding of the French connection in religious studies. While I have spoken of Eliade already, I would also like to come to the ideas of some post-Eliadean religious scholars like Russell McCutcheon and Bruce Lincoln. To quote McCutcheon, in keeping with Durkheimian tradition of sociological studies on religion and myth, we could say that a social formation is an activity of experimenting with, authorizing or combating and reconstituting widely circulated ideal types, idealizations, or better put it, mythifications that function to control the means of and sites where social significance is selected, symbolized and communicated. Lincoln, distinguished service professor of the history of religions in the Divinity School of the University of Chicago, on the other hand, regards Durkheim's ideas to be elemental and insists on adding the critical and political edges of cultural theorists, right from Antonio Gramsci to Roland Barthes and Pierre Bourdieu. Students of sociology or social science must be well aware of Durkheim's idea of social facts. You see, although Durkheim's main objective was to defend the autonomy of social facts in his studies on religion, he admitted that a theory of religion must rest on sciences, which must include the sciences of nature as well. Thus, we see that recent developments have made a number of attempts to bridge the gap between Durkheim's sociology of religion and that of evolutionary biology. David Sloan Wilson, an American evolutionary biologist, in his work entitled Darwin's Cathedral, wrote of how group selections operate in certain religious groups. He particularly spoke of the reinforcing power of moral commitment to the sacred symbols. These symbols, he said, command reverence as well as cast a major impact on one's behavior. In turn, this might affect one's survival and reproduction. There was also Roy Rappaport, an American anthropologist, who gave a detailed account of the role of sacrality in social evolution. He specially emphasized on the sanctity of rituals and languages by which groups safeguard their identities while also responding to changes. Kinship behavior is yet another point of linkage with Durkheim's theory of religion and also with that of evolutionary theory. At the genetic level, theories like kin selection and inclusive fitness imply that individual animals will sacrifice themselves for the greater good of their gene pool. While human group affiliation is not delimited to close biological families, any group can serve the role of kin equivalent. In this way, kin is constituted as a cultural construct, the point which Durkheim made in his discussion on clans. There is another concept, that of prestige goods as social capital, which is equally important in the study of Durkheim's and of evolutionist ideas. Durkheim's sacred objects have been considered to be made of things of social prestige, and in turn the objects of social prestige are thought of to be sources of salient social information. An economy of prestige goods sanctions tribal leaders to attract respect and to secure hierarchical relations with other competing groups. Thus, in this way, religious systems become the expression of symbolic culture. Let me now speak of an arguable stand in Durkheim's work. Well, from the various postulates of evolutionary theory, as I have so long discussed, in fact emanates the fact that Durkheim was often regarded as the perfect social science model by evolutionary psychologists. This was true despite of his failure to consider the inherited and adapted mechanisms of individual minds. This standard social science model, according to the evolutionary psychologists, quite erroneously pictures the mind as a blank slate into which norms are entered, rather are loaded. This is the arguable stand about which I spoke about, because in the elementary forms Durkheim writes that the whole social world seems populated with forces that in reality exists only in our minds. Therefore, the only way society can survive is in our minds. It must enter into us and then become methodized. In spite of the views of evolutionary psychologists about culture and cultural worldviews being things manifested in individuals, a disagreement between amorphous culture and group specific culture is much needed. You see, groups are composed of individuals who have a tendency to react to representations of group identities and come to accept the group ideas as objectivities. So, in this sense, it is seen that groups may be continuously remodeled as output fictions of individual minds. But it must be noted that among these fictions there are also certain strong ideologies that curtail their behaviors. Thus, from the discussion on reinventing Durkheim's religion, all I can briefly say in inference is that it is conspicuously evident that the Durkheimian project of explaining the elementary forms of religious behavior as elementary forms of social behavior goes hand in hand to evolutionary studies on the social dispositions of individuals. Thank you for attending the lecture. We will meet in some other discussion on some other topic.